Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to completely transform how we think about HR. We're moving away from viewing human resources as just this background administrative function, and we're turning it into a true strategic powerhouse. We're talking all about HR data gathering, measuring, and reporting. These are literally the tools that get you a seat at the executive table. Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap for mastering HR analytics. This stuff is absolutely essential for your SHRM and HRCI certification prep. We'll be hitting the foundations of HR data, the scientific research process, data types and statistics, key metrics and financials, strategic forecasting, and finally, reporting the strategic value. Section 1, Foundations of HR Data. Let's look at how we create that strategic alignment. So, to actually align HR with broader organizational goals, we can't just guess, right? We need solid data. Let's break down the basic research methods we use to get it. On the left here, we have primary versus secondary research. Gathering your own brand new direct data, like, say, sending out an internal employee engagement survey, well, that's primary research. Using existing data, like industry turnover reports, that's secondary research. Now, on the right side, we contrast inductive reasoning, which means building a brand new theory from specific observations, with deductive reasoning, where you're actually testing an existing theory against specific data. Moving on to Section 2, the scientific research process and rigorous HR evaluation. If you want to effectively evaluate your HR programs, you just can't rely on gut feelings anymore. You really need these 5 steps. So, let's imagine we want to test if a new sales training program actually improves store performance. Step 1 is problem analysis. That's identifying that our current sales are just too low. Step 2 is hypothesis formulation. We hypothesize that this new training is going to increase sales by, say, 10%. Step 3 is experimental design, which means deciding we'll train half the stores and compare them to the other half. Then, Step 4 is data collection, where we gather the actual sales numbers post-training. And finally, Step 5 is data analysis. This is where we determine if the training actually made the mathematical difference we predicted. Next up is Section 3, Data Types and Statistics as Analytical Tools. Let's see how this all builds together. A truly comprehensive HR analysis requires both sides of the data coin. On one hand, you've got quantitative analysis. These are your hard numbers, often gathered through structured surveys. On the other hand, you absolutely need qualitative analysis. This gives you the rich, human insights gathered from tools like interviews, focus groups, and observation techniques. Think of it like this. The numbers tell you what happened, but the conversations and observations, they tell you why it happened. Once we've got all that data, we use descriptive statistics to actually make sense of it all. The heavy hitters here include the mean, which is just your average, the median, which is the exact middle number, and the mode, the most frequent number in your data set. Then you have the range, which shows the spread from your lowest to your highest value. We also look at standard deviation, and that measures how much the data varies from the mean. And finally, correlation. This one is a really critical concept for your certification exams. It shows the relationship between two variables, kind of like comparing training hours to total sales revenue. And this brilliantly illustrates the results of our sales training experiment. As you can see, the post-training mean is clearly higher than the pre-training mean, which shows us an overall improvement. But whatever you do, don't ignore that standard deviation metric. That helps us understand performance equity across the different stores. If the standard deviation is really high, it basically means some stores skyrocketed while others stay completely flat. And that's a massive signal that we need to dig deeper into exactly how the training was delivered. Now, when we're measuring these outcomes, our tools absolutely must be reliable. Reliability simply means the consistency of a measure. Just think of a simple skills test. If you give an employee the exact same test on Monday and then again on Friday, and their knowledge hasn't changed, their scores should be the exact same, right? That is test/retest reliability. We also have to look at internal consistency, ensuring all the questions in a single survey are measuring the same thing. Plus, rater agreement, which ensures 2 different managers score an observation the exact same way. An HR measurement has to produce consistent results to be trustworthy. No way around it. But here's the catch. Reliability just isn't enough on its own. We also need validity. Validity is the extent to which a test actually measures what it claims to measure. And here is a huge warning for HR professionals. Even if your sales training metrics are highly reliable and super consistent, they are completely useless if they don't validly measure actual store performance improvements. Like, if your test just measures rote memorization rather than actual on-the-floor sales skills, it's not valid for predicting job performance at all. All right, Section 4, Key Metrics and Financials. Let's translate this into actionable KPIs. Let's keep moving up the scaffolding here. Managers track a bunch of essential HR metrics and KPIs daily on their dashboards. We're looking at things like employee turnover, which tells us how many people are leaving the company. Then there's cost per hire, which tracks the efficiency of your recruitment budget. We also track training ROI, headcount budgeting to ensure we have the perfect number of staff relative to our revenue, and of course, overall performance measurement. Guys, these are literally the vital signs of your organization. And that brings us to the ultimate bottom line, financial measures. To be truly strategic, HR professionals absolutely must speak the language of business. And that means using financial equations like return on investment or ROI. It means conducting a thorough cost-benefit analysis and performing break-even analysis. You have to be able to mathematically justify the cost of your programs. Going back to our sales training example, you have to prove the actual financial return it brings back to the company. Section 5, Strategic Forecasting and Scorecards for Looking Ahead. So, now that we have our financial metrics totally locked down, we can use trend analysis and forecasting to proactively plan our workforce budgets over time, rather than just constantly reacting to staff shortages. We categorize these into short-term needs, medium-term needs, and long-term trends. By looking at historical data trend lines, you can accurately predict exactly when you'll need to ramp up hiring before a really busy season, or when long-term industry trends are going to require a major shift in your hiring strategy. This connects perfectly to the balanced scorecard framework. This breaks down the business from 4 distinct but totally interconnected perspectives: financial, customer, internal processes, and learning and growth. Think back to our sales training experiment for a second. That training sits squarely right there in the learning and growth bucket. By measuring it properly, you can draw a direct line showing exactly how that training improves internal processes, which then leads to much happier customers and ultimately drives massive positive financial outcomes. It perfectly visualizes HR's interconnected value. Finally, Section 6, Reporting the Strategic Value. This brings us to our final building block. So the absolute crucial point here is that just having the data, it isn't enough. A massive spreadsheet full of raw numbers is not going to inspire action on its own. You've got to leverage professional presentations, clean charts, and quite frankly, effective data storytelling to actually drive those strategic HR decisions. You have to craft a really compelling narrative around the data that clearly explains the why and the what's next to executive leadership. And that brings us to our core thesis for this entire explainer. HR is no longer administrative only. HR is now data-driven and strategic. Honestly, this is such a profound shift. As data-driven HR professionals, you aren't just processing paperwork anymore. You are the architects of the organization's future, bringing undeniable, measurable strategic value right to the table. Which leaves us with one final, very important question to think about. What data story will you tell to prove your strategic value? I really challenge all of you, especially those of you hitting the books for your HRCI or SHRM certifications right now, to take these building blocks, apply them, and completely transform your own HR departments. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.